Okay, I am actually going to start, but I'm just going to talk slowly so people still have a chance to come in. I'd like to welcome you all to this session entitled How the Beijing Women's Conference Speaks to Us Today. Our focus is on equality. We are part of a wonderful event, a 3-day event of the UN 75 Governance Forum. And the theme of that event is the future we want and the UN we need. So I'm going to share with you a few pictures here. Well, I can explain a little bit about what we're doing. My name is Sun-Young Yoon. I'm the UN representative for the International Alliance of Women and one of the co-drivers of the Feminist and Women's Movement Action Plan, along with Melissa Upreti and Krishanti Demiraj of the Center for Women's Global Leadership at Rutgers University. Today we have a really outstanding international and intergenerational dialogue about the UN Fourth World Conference on Women, that historic event in 1995 when about 50,000 participants gathered in Beijing. This is me 25 years ago. My job was to coordinate the regional planning committees, which were amazing during that period of time. It took almost 2 or 3 years to prepare for this World Conference. And someone at the NGO Forum needed to look after the NGO inputs into the Beijing Platform for Action. I was really excited to be able to be part of that. So at that meeting, this is the NGO Forum, but at the official meeting at 4:45 a.m., yes, early morning, 189 countries agreed to this Beijing Platform for Action. And we do consider that this policy document, along with the human rights documents, such as the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, or CEDAW, and the Sustainable Development Goals, really provides a blueprint for us to achieve gender equality and women's empowerment going forward. So today we're going to ask ourselves, can this amazing legacy address really the crises of our times? At that conference, we claimed that all issues are women's issues. We just need to look at the world through women's eyes. And at this point, we are looking at multiple crises of inequality, racism, assaults against human rights defenders, and we have a crisis in our climate, as well as multiple threats to peace. So how does the UN Fourth World Conference on Women speak to us today, especially the young generation? And what are our demands for the future of the Beijing Platform for Action? How can we hold governments accountable? So this event is part of a series, and I want to explain a little bit what that is. Through personal stories, we're going to engage in this intergenerational dialogue centered around these 3 themes of the Decade for Women, which some of you will remember from 1975 to 1985, declared by the UN. The 3 themes were equality, development, and peace. We believe we need to build a very transformative framework that breaks the silos between these 3 major ideas, but that grounds us also in human rights. Where's this all going? Our process is headed to action. So that could be at the Commission on the Status of Women meeting next year, or CSW 65. There are these things you're going to hear about from us called action coalitions in the future. And there are the events around the UN Women Generation Equality Forums all next year. At this point, let me thank our co-sponsors, the Global Health Justice and Governance Program in the School of Public Health at Columbia University, the Human Rights Institute at Columbia Law School, our partners, NGO CSW New York, RightsLinks, and Seroptimus. And thank you to Jessica, Emily, and Neha, our conference team, that's helping to manage all of you today for this event. Some of you will be watching on live stream on YouTube. And if you are in our Zoom room, you can participate in polling. And I'd like to remind everyone that this is being recorded and will be shared. So to begin with, let's hear a little bit more about your priorities. So get out your index fingers here. I'm going to launch a poll. And this will help us learn a little bit more about you. And the question we're going to ask is, why did you join this event? If you joined just to learn about the topic, please press 1. If you're here to do something that's related to your work or your NGO or your advocacy, please press 2. And if your real intention is to use what you learned today for action, please press 3. So I'll repeat that because a lot of you are already voting like mad. If you're on YouTube, you can put comments in the comments part. We've left that open for you so that you can also express your opinion. Why did you join this event? Number 1, to learn about the subject. Number 2, because you're working on this topic. Number 3, so that you can take action. Okay. I am about to end this poll. 3, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And here we have results. Hey, the majority of you actually want to take action, which is great, 51%. A bunch of you, 47%, are working on the topic. 26% here are here to learn. So that's great. Thanks for taking that poll with us. So what I'd like to do at this point is to introduce our panelists. And to do that, I'm going to show pictures again.
Oh dear.
So we're going to do this in 2 parts. The first part is going to be Voices from 1995. That includes 3 of us. And the first person is Charlotte Bunch, who is the founder and professor at the Center for Women's Global Leadership at Rutgers University. Charlotte does not know that I have this picture. So, Charlotte, my question, I have another one too, a pretty good one. So
I don't see the picture.
You don't see the picture.
No.
You don't see it? Does anyone else see it? Jessica, is everyone seeing the picture?
I don't think we are.
No, it's a blank screen.
That is no good. I'm going to stop sharing. Let me see if I can share again. Let's see, occasionally we have these technical things. Oh, Jessica, you need to open up all panelists so that I can share the screen. Okay, how's this? Are we not seeing?
We see a pencil.
Sorry?
We see a pencil.
You see a pencil, that's no good. Okay, Jessica, are we good to go?
Yep, I think you were just hitting the whiteboard. You just need to share your slides, not the whiteboard.
We are good. This is the whiteboard.
You go to your options at the top. Don't show the whiteboard.
Well, let's see. So excuse everybody, please. Okay, we're still trying here.
There we
There you go.
Hey, there's Charlotte.
All right.
Okay. Thank you to Jessica for helping us with that one. Where are you here, Charlotte?
Where am I here? I'm at the Global Tribunal that we held for the Global Campaign for Women's Human Rights in the Wairo Center, holding up our book on local to global action and human rights.
Can you tell us a little bit about why you were in Beijing and the connection with your really important role at the Vienna Women's Conference?
Well, I was in Beijing. You know, really, I have to say, first of all, I was involved in most of the women's conferences, primarily initially because I wanted to meet feminists from around the world. And I think that's why a lot of women went to Beijing. It was a global opportunity to hear about, to learn from, and to meet feminists from elsewhere at a time before the internet and all the things we have now to see each other. So I was in Beijing really as the culmination of that 25 years for me of organizing around ultimately women's rights or human rights, and to get women's rights embedded into the women's rights as human rights embedded into the Beijing platform.
Yep.
This was
Yep.
the work we did in Vienna at the World Conference on Human Rights. And what we wanted to do in Beijing was not just to say human rights are important to women, but to say all the issues of the Beijing platform have a dimension of human rights. And that's what we wanted to get on there.
Can you give us an example of what happened to you in Beijing, where you had to make that point? Were there some women who were skeptical about whether or not human rights belonged everywhere?
Well, I think there were certainly some women and lots of men who were skeptical. I think part of the skepticism was the fear that human rights would be seen in a narrow way as only sort of political and legal aspects, and not also addressing women's economic and social status. And so we also had to be presenting and fighting for a broader understanding of human rights, something that I believe was let loose in Vienna at the World Conference on Human Rights, not only with women's rights, but with really understanding that human rights incorporates economic and social issues. So for example, women working on the poverty platform were skeptical when we said women's rights are human rights. Well, do you really include issues of poverty in that? And so we had to have these discussions of, yes, of course, the violation of your right to food is a fundamental human right. The need for basic services, for homes, for jobs, these are all in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And as women, we want to come back to this holistic vision of human rights. And women's rights are human rights is not only about what we did a lot on, which was issues of violence against women and trafficking that had been left off the agenda, but it was also saying these are connected. And I think it came from what, well, now we might call intersectional, but what we called then an understanding of the interrelationship, that you couldn't get equality without development and peace. And you couldn't get development without equality and peace. So that these are all interconnected issues. And to me, the human rights framework was a powerful tool for talking about that interconnection. But we had many arguments with women who felt that we were just imposing a narrow what sort of political and civil rights perspective, which had been the product of the Cold War and the Western domination in the past. It's not the origin, I think, of human rights, which is larger than that, but it certainly was the prevailing view of human rights that came to us from the 50s to the 70s or 80s, and a view that was being challenged by women, but also by many social and political activists, indigenous people, and other factors. So we saw ourselves linking all of that and making the Beijing platform a broad and interconnected statement of what it would mean to realize the human rights of women.
Did you have a large delegation going there? Were you part of a US delegation or a part of an NGO delegation?
I was part of the NGO delegation that the Center for Women's Global Leadership organized. I was not part of a US delegation. I was not an official delegate to the government conference. I did have an NGO ECOSOC pass to the government conference to lobby the conference. And the Center for Women's Global Leadership brought many women, including the ones that testified at the tribunal, which is the photo you have, on the violations of women's rights as human rights. So we brought people to testify on these issues.
So in the testimonies, was that your inspiring moment? I mean, everyone has that moment that they remember from Beijing. For me, it was the opening, which you all saw the picture of, where 10,000 people in that stadium, when I was giving out tickets at the door, and all these famous Chinese actors were coming in, and and
Right.
I walked into that stadium, and that was my moment when I said, my gosh, where did all these people come from? You know, why are we here? And that was only a fraction that was there. So was this tribunal your moment? I mean, what was your moment?
Well, it's hard for me to say one moment, but certainly the moment when I walked out on this stage at the tribunal and saw hundreds of women in Wairo at the NGO Forum coming to hear and to testify and be a part of a whole day on violations of women's human rights, and coming through the mud and through the rain and all those things that we had to deal with in Wairo. It was a moment of inspiration. It was also a moment of inspiration at other points too. I had worked before on bringing lesbian rights into the World Conference from Mexico and Copenhagen. So it was a moment of inspiration when, for the first time, Beverly Ditzi from South Africa spoke at the government conference to the rights of lesbians. That was also a very important moment of inspiration for me, because it said our human rights issues are everywhere and everyone.
Indeed, indeed. And so look at this one.
Oh my goodness, what a wonderful photo.
Who are you?
Peggy,
Then what is this moment?
Well, indeed.
Who are these people? Tell everyone.
Well, starting from the left, of course, is me in the purple.
You look exactly the same, by the way.
I don't think I look different, exactly.
You do.
A little older, but you know. And then Norlene Heiser, who was the executive director of UNIFEM. My partner, Roxana Carrillo, who worked for UNIFEM and who worked on these campaigns for women's rights as human rights from the inside. We had a inside-outside partnership of working toward this conference, toward this recognition. And of course, one of my best friends and mentors, Peggy Antrobus on the right, who was one of the founders of DAWN, the Southern-based coalition from the Barbados, Southern-based coalition of feminist activists, who actually hired me to do a film called World Feminists for the 1980 Copenhagen Conference, which featured feminists from the Global South as well as the North in 1980, saying, we are feminists from everywhere. So Peggy Antrobus has certainly been a leader in the global women's movement. What we were doing in this moment, I don't know. Roxana has a pad there. So we were probably trying to make strategy on something, right?
Taking notes.
I want that photo. That's a lovely photo.
I know you didn't know I had it, and it's one of my favorites here. It's the movers and shakers photo, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
I'm going to come back to you, Charlotte, for an assessment later. And right now, I want to introduce Zoni Woods, who is a gender and environment consultant. And a correction on many of the flyers you've been getting, she is not necessarily with the Asia Development Bank, but is a general consultant. And Zoni, tell us about this picture.
Well, you know, you posted it the other day, and I don't think I had ever seen this photo, but I think this was one of our staff retreats.
It was.
And it was one of our days, and you hosted us in Hoboken. And
I gave you all my hats.
Yes, I think you gave us all your hats. And yeah, so it was really nice to see everyone again. As you can see, we were a very small team of people. And when we started, it was actually the first CSW when I was first hired. It was just Irene, the coordinator, the NGO Forum coordinator, Rita, who's at the back, sort of right, I guess that's the Empire State Building. So
yeah, coming out of her head.
Yes. And then myself, and we had a tiny little office in the church center and one computer to share. Oh my goodness.
That's great.
And one computer to share between all of us. And yeah, so not this big office. This was a palace compared to where we started. We were literally like in a little cubicle, the three of us. And then, you know, our team grew. And then this photo, is our open area in our office where we, our very small
It was a
team
shared space, the first shared space, which was imposed on us by the fact that we couldn't afford any more office space. So we were all of us in one shared space. And that image you see there, I drew on the wall because that's how we felt, like the Indian Durga, trying to.
Yes, I remember that. I think that was the first thing you did when you arrived. I thought, who is this woman? She walked in, she kind of said hello to everyone and took out, I think you did it with a pen.
Magic marker, yeah.
Yeah, you did it with a marker and you started drawing this. Anyways, and
well, what was your job in all this? That's you right there. What were you doing at the NGO Forum?
Well, I was the youth, so I had sort of two things. I was the youth coordinator, and then I also worked with you on a lot of the UN advocacy work and in the regional, or helping organize for the regional meetings. So that was my job. So with you, we participated in all of the regional meetings, and at each one of the regional meetings, we organized a youth conference ahead of the NGO Forum. And this was actually, something that was done sort of for the first time for, I think, one of these UN women's conferences. And it was something that happened as a result of a whole bunch of young women who had organized for the Earth Summit. And we had been involved in the Earth Summit process as youth, as part of the overall youth process. And we, had to confront a lot of, I guess, sexism within the environmental movement, and we're very frustrated by that, and the youth movement as well. And we also came into contact with the women's caucuses at these, in the preparatory meetings in the lead up to the Earth Summit. So many of us sort of naturally gravitated to these amazing women's caucuses where the women were, really strategic, and their analysis was so, quite broad, and it took so many of the issues that we cared about into account, and they made space for us as well, so women like Bella Abzug from the Women's Environment and Development Organization, and Wangari Maathai and Vandana Shiva, and all these women, Wangari Maathai from Kenya, Vandana Shiva from India, and all these women who were just, incredible in terms of strategizing and pushing forward on Agenda 21 and ensuring that women were not left out of the Earth Summit process.
So in fact, what you and Charlotte are reminding us is that this Fourth World Conference was not only part of For Women's Conference, but was part of a cycle of social development conferences that were taking place in the 90s. And many of them happened before the Fourth World Conference. And therefore, in a way, the sequence was perfect for us to declare all issues as women's issues. Go back to Beijing, Zoni, and tell us a little bit about the most challenging thing in organizing the youth tent. Remember, we had all these tents at the NGO Forum to make sure that we had all the diversities and all the themes represented. And there was an indigenous people's tent. The men wanted a tent. We refused a men's tent. But there were a lot of men there, a lot of men and boys there. Yeah, I remember that. I remember in the indigenous people's tent is that Beatrice Schultes, who I hope is online with us, was coordinating there. And she said, our process is taking much longer because we don't have just one language to deal with. She says, we have hundreds of languages here. So give us time to process. And so she was working through the Beijing Platform for Action consensus because we were all trying to develop consensus so that we could bring it over to the official meeting. And their process just was the right process because they gave priority to participation. But that was a challenge. How about you, Zoni? Was it herding sheep, or was it like, were there many arguments, quarrels? Like, what was going on there in the youth tent?
You know, I think it was just very organic how things worked in the youth tent. I think, you know, I had a fantastic partner who you've continued to work with, Tanya Selvaratnam, and whom I worked with in organizing the youth tent. And I think everything, we just try to make space for, you know, the idea behind the youth tent was to make space for everyone. And so there were things that we planned, and then there was enough space for things to happen organically. And I think one of my best memories of the youth tent, there were many, but one of my best memories was having girls in the youth tent. It was something that we hadn't expected, and all of a sudden there was, you know, a delegation of girls, you know, who were, you know, between 9 and 12-year-olds, you know, who arrived in Beijing, and they wanted to have their own workshop and had this amazing program. And you know, that just, you know, blew me away, because it was not something that I had planned for. And it was just such a beautiful moment because we learned so much from them. So I think, you know, it taught me the importance of also, you know, you can plan things, but in the women's movement also you have to let things happen organically as well. And just when you were talking about, you know, we all had to deal with the mud, and we all had to deal with the bureaucracy and the difficulties in getting there, whether it's, you know, grassroots women having to fundraise for that ticket and that hotel, you know, room, and you know, sort of overcoming all the bureaucracy and getting to Beijing. And then I remember arriving, and the structure was just being built. I think you and I maybe arrived around the same time, and there was kind of, you know, I was in shock. And I remember going back to my room and crying, like literally crying, thinking, we're going to have all these women arrive, and, you know, the paths that are there, we can't have women who are using wheelchairs, you know, use these paths.
It was very hard. It was very difficult.
And somehow we still like persevered, and we all kind of pulled together, rolled up our sleeves, and it just, you know, it really was a demonstration of you know, our, you know, sisterhood, and our, you know, our resilience, and just belief that we could come together and make something out of this, you know, not perfect situation. Yet it became one of the most powerful experiences for so many of us, and it's been so foundational. So, you know,
how about you? So how about you, Zoni? Did that conference and that experience, good and bad, influence what you did afterwards? What happened the year afterwards? I mean, how did it shape what you did afterwards? And give us 2 sentences on that.
Okay, so actually, before I give you 2 sentences, I need to plug because my computer's about to die. But
okay, Charlotte, tell us, what did you do afterwards? Was it a success? Do you feel as though this was a good time, and how did it influence what you did afterwards?
I definitely felt it was a success. And I think one of the biggest things that happened for me afterwards is that we had to follow up all of these ideas that we had been putting forward from Cairo and Rio and Vienna and then Beijing, sort of as a culmination. Many of us had not worked in the UN other than on women's conferences before that. And all of a sudden, we had to follow up inside of the UN all of these demands and issues that we had put in the Beijing platform. So for me, at the Center for Women's Global Leadership, we began to go not only to the Commission on the Status of Women and monitor the implementation there, but we also started to go to the Commission on Human Rights in Geneva and to become more involved in seeing how was the UN system going to follow up on the integration of these feminist women's rights issues throughout. So I spent many more years after the conference working in relation to the UN than I had ever imagined before, where I really came into it to get them to hear our issues. And now we were suddenly inside to some degree, lobbying for and trying to make those happen. So it had a big influence. The success made us feel that the UN could be an institution to move forward women's rights.
That I think is a really interesting message. I don't know if some of you were following the session with Madeleine Albright and Hillary Clinton and Milan Vivir on Beijing 25. But when asked that question of what happened afterwards, exactly a similar thing, which is to bring it home. That the conference itself was not the end, it was the beginning of a process of mainstreaming it. And that's why they created the White House Task Force with Teresa Lohr, which was going to mainstream the Beijing Platform for Action into all of the departments of the US government. So I think what's happening afterwards, with many people who never were in Beijing, many of you may be with us here today, you're an important part of that process because it's what happened afterwards and still happening today. And Zoni's going to tell us what happened to her.
Okay. Well, like Charlotte, I think that, so after Beijing, I probably went to about 16 commissions on the status of women, where I mostly focused on working on sexual and reproductive health and rights. And with that, there was a caucus that was working and following up on those issues. And, one of the most important things that I learned we had to do was to ensure that, the knowledge about how to do advocacy at the UN, and this is something that Charlotte also invested a great deal in, is bringing in sort of a new generation of activists, working with them so that they had the knowledge to be effective advocates at the UN. And we did the same actually through the work of, at the time I was working with the International Women's Health Coalition. So we started an advocacy practice kind of program where we brought mostly young activists to pass on some of the knowledge and share sort of the experiences of doing advocacy at the UN. And I think that's a really important part of our work.
So you may have actually helped with our part two.
Exactly. Good.
Right into you
Hopefully.
speak.
Good.
All right, we have some two young activists here, and I'm going to introduce Rahima. Rahima Sajid is the American Pakistan Fellow and Youth Representative for the International Alliance of Women. And Rahima, you are here on an issue of feminism and Islam, which is something that you have spoken out about. And I'm going to ask you, in addition to this issue, what do you think is the most pressing issue for young women today?
Thank you, Sun Young, and to Charlotte and Zoni for sharing all of those. I kind of have like chills just feeling connected to the energy and just listening to some of the stuff that you have shared, because I think a lot of it still it resonates and is relevant, right? But it's also so amazing, and I feel so much gratitude that so much of this groundwork was kind of done before, right? I got to sort of join the movement in, and then take it from here on. And so this picture that you see of me, I think it really speaks to my personal experience being just a young Pakistani American Muslim, growing up in a society where there was a lot of just, I guess, misconceptions about like my identities. And my way to kind of speak against it was educate, right? I was on a college campus. I was majoring in women's gender and sexuality studies, and I just had felt, and political science, and between courses I remember leaving and having this feeling of not feeling heard. And so I walked over to our women's center and I asked them if they would sponsor me an event and that would put together, and I can host it and I can speak at it. Because this was something that felt really like close to my heart and I wanted to speak on it. And I think that was my way of putting my voice out there, right? And getting a little bit more clarification on just like we can come from different identities, but we can be united under the same goal, as we've said, like human rights are women's rights, right? And so I think that theme is still to this day something we are working through, right? Just yesterday, I finished this I will say like training on this, on like just diversity and how we can actually learn to be more comfortable in our differences instead of trying to make us all uniform, right? We can all still be under human rights in the different forms that we come. And I think that's still something that we are working through today, as we were working through, maybe years ago when the, conference first happened.
So does the UN give you a place to do that? Why should young feminists pay attention to that?
Yeah, so I will again speak on my personal experience with the UN as a young professional, right? And just as a young, I think, girl, like feminism was something that was sort of like, I think it picked me, right? Like I was like always passionate about this topic. And by background, I have like my master's in public administration, and then which taught me really how to like organize and operationalize some of the goals that we have, right? Like how do we strategize? How do we get like, resources, and what does the budget process look like? So for me, I went for like the very practical way of like, how do we translate what our goals to like real life plans? And I think there's a huge connection between that and just equality and development. So with the UN, I remember when I joined as an intern at NGO-CSW and then, getting a pass to go to the UN, I was just really grateful and excited to sort of just sit there as a young professional and get to see multiple events on different issues that pertain to women. From different sectors, right? Because what that taught me was that we all have something to offer, and we just have to find our conversation piece where we can connect the resource overlapping with the need, right? And so for me, the UN definitely provided a space for that. And it also just gave me, I think, I'm from New York, it's a diversity, but when I got to the UN, I really realized, no, like this world is a lot bigger, right? And there's so many more people and so many more things.
And it's all sitting in New York. I mean,
Right.
So that it was like a huge humbling and learning experience that really connected me, I think, to all of us, again, in our differences. So it really did provide that space for me to kind of, and not just read about it in books, but like real time experience it with like my emotions and just like my connection with people. So yeah.
So in fact, you're reminding us that at the very beginning, I let you see some of the slogans that came out. Slogans which were really capturing some of the thought process for the Beijing conference. And I think, I don't know if you would agree with me, Charlotte and Zoni, but I thought that one of the most important things that happened was the recognition of unity with diversity, that the diversity itself, its acknowledgement, is actually a strength for us. And I think that's what you were saying, Rahima, as well. And the UN tends to embody that. But for a lot of people, feminists, it was a discovery that could be a strength, that we didn't all, that we could actually build on that diversity as a strength. And certainly that then becomes the basis of equality.
And just to say, in terms of human rights, it's the basis of universality of human rights, because people often think universality is the opposite of diversity.
Yeah.
But in fact, universality is only achieved through recognizing diversity and the diverse ways in which all human rights have to be recognized. So I think it was a very important message from the Beijing conference. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it continues to reverberate. You have in different ways. So, we thankfully, we continue to be a strong voice for intersectionality and ensuring that that is an approach to the work that we do with regards to women's rights. But if you look at the message of the SDGs and what they call leave no one behind, that's very much aligned with that message as well.
Great. Let me introduce Uzma. Uzma is a human rights advocate and youth leader at the UN. Where are you? What are you doing here?
This was actually happening in Thailand, Bangkok, back in 2016, where the United Nations Security Council resolution was adopted for youth, peace, and security. So what they were doing was to present and to make a document that was basically for highlighting the role of young people as a change makers for the peace and security across the globe. So they had these kind of dialogue sessions in different continents, where this was the Asia Pacific dialogue, where I was representing my country, and I was actually summarizing the 3-day event by reading a poem of mine on the piece.
Which we will hear about at some point. And what are you doing here?
Oh my God, this was happened in New York, where I was really honored to be on stage with the Honorable President of Ghana, Nana Akufo-Addo, and the United Nations head, Ms. Fumzile Mlambo. We were actually representing the UN Women and the actions we take regarding the child marriages, acid attack, and domestic violence across the globe. So we were actually taking a pledge where the president donated millions of dollars for the people in Ghana, and Fumzile and I were taking pledges to end child marriage and say no more. So we initiated that hashtag that day, like say no more to the child marriage. So the audience there was more than 70,000. It happened in Central Park in 2017, September, High Level Political Forum.
We could go year by year and show picture by picture if we want to as well, where you've been, what you've been doing. But can I go back to Charlotte for a minute and Zoni? So the violence against women issue used to be pretty much about what happened in the home. And through the years, we've seen it become much broader, much more important in the discussion of peace, in the discussion of early child marriage. Do you think Beijing was important in helping that happen, or at least the process afterwards?
Yes, I think that the process really through the 90s, I would say Vienna and the Human Rights Conference as well, where we did tribunals talking about the different forms of violence against women as human rights issues. So we had testimony in Beijing and in Vienna about the violence of rape, about the violence of economic denial, adversity, about the violence of the lack of control over your body and reproductive rights, and the connection of violence against women as a tool used to control women's bodies in all kinds of areas. Trafficking in women, of course, was actually one of the first issues that the UN took up that we would now call violence against women, but it was taken up in a very paternalistic way, as opposed to now when we understand that trafficking is about women controlling their bodies and their sexuality and having control over where they're taken and what happens to them. So I definitely think the Beijing process allowed a movement that I have to keep saying, this comes from the women's movement, but the Beijing and all the UN conferences gave space for the world to pay attention to what was happening in the women's movement in all the different parts of the world. And without those conferences, I think it would have been much harder for the voices of women to talk about the ways they were experiencing violence and all the multiple forms of, incest and community violence, etc. So yes.
Absolutely. So Zoni, did you want to add something from your health experience on this? The FGM, did you work with that issue as well in Beijing?
Well, Charlotte has mentioned sort of what, the different aspects of and the areas where we were able to also bring an agenda where we talked about violence against women. But I think if we sort of fast forward to now, and we have seen quite a bit of progress in you know, the policies and laws around violence against women at the national level. And, you know, the work that was done at the Vienna Human Rights Conference and at Beijing were really fundamental to helping, you know, bring that forward to the national level implementation. So we've seen quite a bit of change there. And then the other thing is that, you know, now in the context of climate change and disaster resilience, we're also talking about violence against women. So it has, again, you know, it has allowed us to bring the issue up in different contexts because there's a very strong link, you know, to violence against women and climate and violence against women in disaster management. So
we're going to come back to climate, Soni.
Yeah.
And you.
Yes.
So here is Isma.
Right.
Isma, why do you think it's important for young feminists, young women leaders, youth leaders to engage with the UN? Here you are in one situation. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that?
Yes, although I'm never happy with United Nations and it's working, but the only thing I really like about United Nations is it is very much inclusive and it provides platforms based on equality. Because I still remember one event where it was a youth forum and I got a chance to meet with so many people where I was attracted to a girl on a wheelchair. And there was also a guy who was wearing a purple earring with the word written queer on that. So there are so many things that we got in contact with. Before that, we don't have any idea about how the people are struggling, how they are facing hardships in their countries. But when I got connected to both of them, and then I realized that I also had one mutual friend with that queer guy in Malta who got the Commonwealth Youth Award as well. And then when we realized that although we are miles apart, we are from different countries, but the issues regarding women and LGBTQs and the vulnerable groups in the countries are same. So why I'm happy with UN is because they provided us with such a platform among the world of bureaucrats, political leaders, policymakers, where we were also heard. We were inclusive. We were making policies for our own self, where our countries don't provide us with such platforms. Our countries don't help us. Our countries don't even accept our existence. We are still struggling in our countries for the youth empowerment, for women empowerment, for LGBTQs, for physically challenged people, and all other people who are in the minority group or vulnerable group. So this is what I really like about UN, and this is the only platform where we can still get engaged and get in contact with people like you, Charlotte, Zoni, where we are getting all the experience from
you
the senior feminists. I told you are so young. So I said you, Charlotte and Zoni, from whom we are getting all the information. And with that senior mindset and the combination of young blood, we really can impart the same vision of 1995 to the generation coming after us.
Here you are. So let me ask you and Rahima this question. What is your hope for Beijing 25? I mean, Beijing 25 is this year. We know that the UN is going to extend it because of COVID. We're really celebrating pretty much this next year. So do you have any special thing on your agenda that you really think it needs to do? Uzma, you go ahead.
What I believe is it's 25 years. The significance of the conference is still undimmed, and the relevance of Beijing 25 cannot be overstated till today, because we just crossed the situation of COVID, where social and economic impact lead to increase in violence against women, creating threats to reverse the hard-won advances made in last 25 years to empower girls and women. So what we really need is to reaffirm all those promises made by the world leaders in 1995 in Beijing, that they are still in progress. The targets that were achieved, how to make them sustainable, and the targets that are still not achieved, how to make them in a way that because the world changed, the time changed in 25 years, there were issues and there are still some issues that emerged with the course of time. And we really need to understand the issues, the outcomes of 1995, the current challenges, and then we have to reaffirm all those challenges and solutions in this Beijing 25 conference and in CSW 65, that how we are taking that in future, how we are combining them all, and how we are going to the grassroots and we are making it practicable and sustainable in future.
So Rahima, what are some of the changes that you see, some of the new challenges?
I think that maybe because we're living in a different world in terms of, say, technology and communication and things like that, we don't have some of the same challenges maybe that posed before. So I think like those sort of things definitely help us to like just coordinate, you know, and just like mobilization and just communication on certain levels. But I do still believe that some of the challenges that are still present, like my hope would be that we listen to the youth, right? We listen to the challenges that actually like, oh no, it was then and it's still now, and kind of sit down and do like a reflective piece of why, right? Like what has been that process that maybe there has been some, you know, like achievements, which I'm sure there has, but there's still some of those same struggles that we're dealing with. And I think we have to kind of get to the root of why, and that only comes with like deep reflection and conversation, right? And I think the women's movement and like this just international conference has been just really good place for that, like the energy, and it's just so organic, right? But from my sense, because I'm someone who works again in the administration sense and like is like an operational person, I believe that we're operating under systems already, sort of, and so we're trying to push change under a system that's already set. And sometimes while we're in conversations, we might learn that, oh no, we might actually have to challenge this system in a different way, right? Because by following it, we're still like abiding by it, even though we're challenging it, right?
Give an example.
For like just like bureaucracies and stuff, right? Like for some reason, like I'm always saying that like social issues, right? Like we have to kind of have like a common ground and ownership of that, which then translates into like a strat plan, right? Which then translates into like a budget, right? But if we don't have diversity present and different perspectives like present in those scenarios, we kind of lay out on what we think, right, the rollout plan should look like, right? And then someone comes along with a different perspective, but we don't know how to fit them into the system that we already created or this plan that we already created, right? And they might be asking to allocate budgets somewhere else with a really valid reason, but just because we haven't, you know, done like had that perspective present, or we didn't leave room for adjustment, it becomes like just hurdle after hurdle to kind of get that to new perspective to be advocated for, it to build a structure on, to get funding for, right? So for me, I think that that conversational piece is really important, and then laying out a plan that is, again, in terms of like equality and diversity, like very mindful of that, and then also leaving room for adjustments along the way, because we're not going to get everything right in the first snapshot, and so I think that's also where we're coming in as the youth, right? Like all this great work has been laid down and we're so grateful for it, but here are still some of the things that are coming up, and how do we weave this into the movement, right? And so I think that's where I do most of my work. So that's why I can speak on it from this perspective. But I think that if we do get it at that point, it saves a little bit of like the challenges that come up later on, you know.
But I would like to add something.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Because the issues are still there. If we go back to 1995, or if we see the issues today, the glass ceilings are still there. The glass walls are still there, and we are still busy in shattering all of them. We still have the issues that you cannot go out without a man and on the street. Recently, we have so many cases in my country. So I'm talking regarding in that context. Also, my personal experience was I joined a hospital as an administrator, and I was the youngest administrator in the 100 years of history.
For you, those of you who don't know, she's actually a medical doctor.
Yeah.
so she belongs there. It's not like she just crashed it.
Yeah. So the men in the hospital were not ready to work under my administration with that creativity sense, with that working sense, or because I was bringing two things. It was a gender gap and it was a generation gap. because of my female gender and because of my age, they were not accepting that. And then they created some trouble. Then I had to go from a workplace harassment that affected my mental health, that affected my work, that affected my productivity, and I had to resign after that. So the thing is that even we are activists, we are helping other females, but still we go through that male dominated door. And we are still grateful that you people were there in 1995 who started shattering that ice and shattering that glass ceiling in the male dominated world. And we are still following it, but the issues are same, I think, and they are still there, and we still have to struggle out of it.
Absolutely. So in fact, I was going to ask about progress. So I'd like to be encouraged a little bit. I mean, let's look back 75 years. Let's look back 75 years. 75 years ago, when the UN was created, we were there. Okay. So in this governance forum, let's remind everyone that the women's movement helped shape the UN institutions, like the Commission on the Status of Women, 1946. Like the 4 World Conferences and the Social Development Conferences, and then the GEAR campaign that resulted in bringing together different agencies, creating a stronger agency called UN Women. So we claim that history. We are really encouraged by the fact that we have that institution, and therefore we claim the right to have accountability from that institution to respond to us, because we have been one of its strengths. And yet, I mean, if you look at the progress, it's so uneven, as you say, Uzma and Rahima, from country to country, but we have made amazing advances in laws, in recognition, political participation, health-wise, Zoni, you know, reductions in maternal mortality, legal-
Girls' education.
Girls' education for sure. So, and all these things don't seem to go backwards entirely. They kind of move forward and go back. But I myself am encouraged. At the same time, I know that a whole generation of advocates are feeling really discouraged at this point. And I wonder how you guys are feeling. Charlotte and Zoni, how are you feeling about progress? I mean, you mentioned girls' education. Are you working in that at the moment? Do you feel as though somehow?
Yeah, I mean, so I have been doing work in the Asia Pacific region now for continuously for about 8 years at the national level, and on different projects. So, you know, whether they're related to, you know, financial inclusion, or I've done a lot of work on natural resource management, but also around climate change and disaster management. And what I see is that you know, we do have some fairly good laws and policies around gender equality in most countries, and where we are failing really is around implementation. And so there's, you know, what
Can you give me an example in climate, for example? Give us an example in climate about.
In climate.
Yeah.
Well, in climate, it's a little bit difficult because you have, you know, not in the national adaptation plans, you may have a mention to gender equality, but it's, you know, it doesn't really translate then to, you know, actual like gender mainstreaming or targets and quotas for women's participation. But so it is a work in progress, I think, on climate. But I think, you know, there's still, we've seen progress around girls' education, TVET. You know, you have places like in Mongolia where it's more girls are actually going to school than boys. So, and girls are doing better in also in tertiary education in many countries as well. So you have
we're always more qualified. Manzoni.
Sorry?
I said we're always more qualified. We're overqualified for what we do.
So I think you know, there's a lot of progress, but I find hope. So I have found a lot of hope in seeing, of course, it has been painful to see the activism around Black Lives Matter, and the fact that it sort of had to, that it had to get to a point where, people, had to get to this point. But I have also found a lot of hope in that, because it has been diverse groups of people standing up around Black Lives Matter. Their demands are very much grounded in principles of human rights, feminist principles, and so on. And so that has given me hope. And young women, who are active around climate change have given me hope. The feminist New Green Deal, or what's it? Sorry, I must have the wrong name.
The Green New Deal.
The Green New Deal, which has feminist demands that are, very much calling out for addressing the root causes, and they're, very much grounded in feminist principles. That gives me hope. So I think that the conversation is changing, and it continues to grow, to be more inclusive, and to be much more aware of the interconnections between all of the issues. And so I think that we're at a very painful time, but also at a very exciting time, because of all of these incredible conversations that are taking place, that are giving me a lot of hope from everywhere, from the global South. And it's been also a very much an intergenerational conversation.
Absolutely. And Rahima brought up something about financing, taking it from the principle and the policy to actually getting money into that. Charlotte, are you feeling discouraged? We don't have the money.
No, I'm not discouraged.
Good.
I think we are in a difficult moment, but I think, as Arundhati Roy says, it's the portal to the future. It's the portal to a new moment. And
Okay.
I think that I agree with everything Zoni said. I just want to add to it. I find hope because Uzma and Rahima and all the women who were leading much of the Black Lives Matter movement, and the women in the climate change, because women are very visible in leadership for the changes that we need to happen. And that would not have been true. I'm about the same age as the UN, so I can tell you the world has changed enormously. It has changed dramatically. We are not there yet, but the differences in what women can and are doing, and the voices, and that, to me, one of the most exciting things in this terrible time was women's leadership also in the COVID crisis.
Yes.
And the recognition immediately that came both for the problems of women, like domestic violence and COVID, and for the leadership of women. These would not have happened even 25, much less 75 years ago. People would not have been in a position to do some of that, and it would not have been recognized. So, of course, this is a terrible time. I don't want to diminish. This is a time of incredible difficulty around the world, but it's also a time of change. And that change is often born in this difficulty. I was born at the end of World War II. It was a time that the war actually produced an enormous change in the cultures. So in a way, we're in that kind of a change now, even though it's not a world war. It is a world phenomena of both economic and personal and health consequences that are very difficult. But out of that, I think we are birthing a newer moment of understanding the challenges. And the UN is not the answer. The answer is all of us and all of you. The answer is the movements. The answer is the civil society. The answer is the students and the universities and all of our institutions that have to change. But the UN, I want to come back to, is a unique space where we get to bring those answers together in a global way and try to hold some accountability. And someone mentioned, and I think it's so important, I think it was you, Uzma, I know so many women who have found that through the UN, they could find better ways to hold their own government accountable. So it's also a space to move in when you're not able to make your own government see and respond. So we need to think of the UN as a part of this multi-complex. Sometimes you move faster locally, sometimes you move faster globally, sometimes you have to be working on multiple levels, but we are the ones who are able and must take that on. And I see women like the women here, the women that are listening to this, and I see more men willing to support women.
Yes.
Which really is very new.
Yes.
And very important.
Yes. Wonderful. And I'm going to let Rahima and Uzma end this portion of our discussion, because the topic of the governance forum is the future we want and the UN we need. So, Rahima, what do you need to change, or what do you need to keep about the UN for the future we want? In 2 sentences.
I think there's just a lot shared, right? And I think that everything is true, right? Like, we have made a lot of progress, right? And like, I think like there was a system where maybe having like women's rights as human rights wasn't even an idea, that like we lived in a world like, oh my God, like we have to convince the folks of this. And now we have institutions built, right? And like entities and stuff that support this, you know, just pushing this agenda. So that's amazing, right? But also it takes time for it to trickle down to every woman in every community. And we kind of have to kind of sit with that and realize, again, the reflection piece, right? And to kind of connect it. And I think, you know, we had a certain mindset when we got recognition of certain issues at a certain, you know, organizational and like institutional levels. But again, like, I think the goals have to just kind of shift a little bit, because we've gotten this part done, right? Like, now what's the next step, right? And this
what do you need the UN to do about it?
I think it's still the listening portion, right? I think it's still the reflection portion. And then I know, like, we talked a little bit about activism being difficult, and like, what do we do today to like, just keep ourselves in the movement. And I'll say, like, on my experience, I had to kind of step away and do like more somatic work and like, you know, meditation, and look at life holistically, because I think sometimes as young activists, we're kind of just like thrown into it, and we do have this sense of urgency, and we have to learn to manage some of this, right? But that's not in any of the conversations, right? That's in like that holistic approach of just like living and like having a right to all of these, like, as we're fighting for others to have a right to this life, like we also as activists do deserve some, you know, that. And I think to kind of see that more would be helpful, because it's more honest, right? Like, this is difficult work. And let's be honest about that. This is difficult, and these are ways that we can support each other in these different ways. And for me, I don't think I've seen that as much at the UN. I've been very inspired at the UN. I've been like, oh my God, this is amazing, and I can like get that like charged energy. But that part of me that gets heavy, you know, sometimes I don't think there's much space for us to kind of talk about those parts.
Well, the UN is a place to be inspired. I think that's really important. I'm gathering that your ask is that it continue to be that space, that open space. Uzma, what do you need from the UN for your future?
What I need from UN is to include more voices, the young female voices from across the globe, because different people, as you were saying, different countries, different people are facing different problems. So no one is similar in their experiences, but UN can provide us one platform where we can all come together and we can find common grounds to find solutions to all those possible problems. But what I need from UN is to be very proactive in this approach, because multilateralism is the need of time. But the thing is that after the issue, you cannot say, okay, fine, this was the issue, so now come together and try to resolve it. We are seeing it. You people are there. You know how the things are changing, and what you see is the next problem would be. So you guys are there with the senior mindset, and we are there with the current situation, struggling phases. So what UN can do is keep on building that momentum with multilateralism, bringing in more voices, having more intergenerational dialogue where we can impart your vision, and we can do that on the ground in reality, and also make government accountable. because the countries that are under UN Charter, at least UN can help them accountable for not implementing the rules and procedures they signed. For example, CEDAW was there. For example, UN Women is having so many laws and regulations. We have ILO ratifications, but the countries are not implementing on that. Right. So the only thing I need from UN is keep on building that momentum of multilateralism, be more inclusive, and keep on having this intergenerational dialogue.
We will remember that as we go forward to the Generation Equality Forums, which are going to be about this. We are going to do a second poll at this point to kind of bring closure to this part of our program. And I'm going to launch a second poll here to hear from you. So we really are emphasizing the importance of action implementation. So the question is, can you commit to an action today? The first choice is, I will share what I learned. That's really important. Second choice is, I'll add this to my own work. And the third choice is, well, I haven't really gotten to that point yet. I won't take an action yet. That's okay. That's all right. We'll send you the recording. And by the end of the time that you hear the second recording, or the recording, you'll be able to take an action. So we give you that option. The question is, can you commit to an action today? So on your phone, your computer, or other device, if your answer is, I will share what I learned, please press 1. If the answer is, I will add this to my own work, 2. And if your answer is, I will not take any action right now, press 3. And I'm going to end this poll because you guys have become really fast at voting. And the majority will share what you learned. This is wonderful. I think that is one of the best things that these kinds of Zoom meetings can do. Adding to your own work is great, 61%. And a minority of you would like to think a little bit more about it, which is great. So looking ahead, please join us for some of the other events in our series. On October 30th, we're going to have the second in our series of these kinds of panels on how the Beijing Women's Conference speaks to us today. The theme will be peace. Then on October 9th, in partnership with the Columbia University co-sponsors, we have an event called Art as Activism, and we invite you to do that, and there will be a whole program. Jessica, I don't know if you want to put into the chat a link to the whole event series that we're going to do together.
Yep, that's going in right now.
Okay, great. So we have to end our intergenerational dialogue. And in closing, let me just requote something I mentioned to you early, because I want to really emphasize this. When Maria Fernanda Espinosa, who was president of the 73rd session of the General Assembly, said that the UN's history is the history of the international women's movement. These are inspiring words, I think, for the next generation, because she also went on to say, the UN is what we make of it. And I think that was what I was hearing from all of you today as well. And it is the next generation that is going to change our governments. The governments are going to be able to change the UN, as well as civil society. So let's work on all these fronts. From all of us here at the Feminist Women's Movement Action Plan and co-sponsors, we thank our great panelists. We have to say goodbye at this point. And I invite all of you to use the chat to express one word, and I'm going to be looking at the chat, to express how you're feeling at this moment. And panelists can participate. Give us one word in our closing that expresses how you're feeling at this moment. Use your chat.
I would like to say Happy Suffrage Day to all the females in New Zealand, because I was going through a chat and there was a female from New Zealand, Carolyn, who was sharing this. So today is 19 September and New Zealand females got the vote to right 127 years back.
I am reading some of our wonderful, grateful. This is for the panelists, by the way. Thankful. Have a lot more work to do. Love to you all. Hopeful, awesome, proud of us, re-energized. Panelists were inspiring peace, culture to the world, feeling motivated, wonderful, and keep writing, even though we have to close and say goodbye to you all. united. Thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye, panelists.
Thank you,
Thank
Sun Young.
you.
See you again.
Great.
Wonderful
Thank you.
session. Gracias.